In this video, we'll explore formulas in Excel. Now, Excel is very much like a calculator, except it's much more efficient and much more powerful. For example, I can do basic order of operations in Excel. When I want to do that, it's a formula, and I start with the equal sign. That tells Excel I need to do a formula. So now I can just click on whatever values I want to enter, or I can just do them manually. Say I want to do 34 plus 25 minus, and I want to subtract and a score. And it'll give me negative 22. If I click on that cell, it shows me exactly what I entered for my formula while giving me the result in the cell itself. So that's a nice feature. I can look up here in the function bar to see what the formula was, and I can go down here to the cell and see what the result is. And I can do any order of operation. For example, maybe I click on this cell and decide I want to divide by 4. And maybe now I want to do that value and I want to square it. I use caret key 2. All these functions are just things I can do in Excel that are using very basic things that we do in a calculator. Now, say I want to actually find the average. If I was in a calculator, I would have to go through here and say add 81 plus 85 plus 875 plus 76, etc., 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 through all my entire data set, which in this case is 21 people, and then 29 people, and then I'd have to divide by 29. That's a lot of manual work. Instead, we have formulas that will allow us to do this. So if I click on formulas, I can do it a couple different ways. I can have Excel do my sum, and then I divide that value by 29. Or I can use the formula for the mean of my set. Now, sum is something that is done so often that they have its own special tab here for it. And I can now just click on my first data point and then drag until every single piece of my data is selected. And there's 29 pieces. So I know my sum is 2,420, and now what I can do for my average is I can say it's the sum divided by 29. 83 4/10 is about the average. Now, I could even find the word sum by looking in the math tab here. Just show you what that would look like if you click on it. Here's sum, and they're in alphabetical order. And what's nice is if you look and you highlight on a value, it tells you exactly what that would do. Adds all the numbers in the range of cells. Okay, so I delete out this information. They just randomly put things there, so I get rid of that, and then I click and drag all of my data that I want, and I hit OK. And again, I could then say equals my value divided by 29. Now there's an even easier way. I can always use the mean or the average. So if I come up to math and trig, well, there's no average there, and there is no word that says mean, so it's not there. But if I click on more functions, another place I can find some math terms is under statistical, and right there is the word average, and it tells me it finds the arithmetic mean. So I delete out this box, and I highlight all of my data. Oh, I forgot one value. If you look up here, it says average B3 to B30. Well, I didn't want B3. I can delete that 3 out and push 2. And there, B2 to B30. And I know because I can look, my first data was in column B in row 2. Okay, so it's always good to check that function or the formula bar up here and see that you have all your pieces of data. And one last way I can do it is I can actually use just typing in. If I start to type mean, M-E-A, well, there's no words. If there were more formulas, they'd be showing up, but there's not. So let's go back and start with average, because that's a similar word, A-V, oh, and there it is, average. I highlight all my data and hit enter, and there I have my average. So again, always make sure your values here are correct and are highlighting everything you have. Now with mean, if we're talking statistics, a lot of times we also report the standard deviation. So I've got some terms here that are in white. I don't want to have them get in our way at the beginning here. Now if I want to calculate my variance, the way that is done is I take each test score, subtract the average, square that value, add them all together and divide by my sample size minus 1. It's a very drawn out process. But we can also use Excel to do this for us. But for purposes of seeing how much simpler life can be with formulas in Excel, follow along, please. So I do equals my test score minus my average. Now I'm going to use the average value over and over and over again. So I hit this F4 at the top of my key. And you see it puts in dollar signs. And you can do that manually as well. And what that tells it to do is to lock on column F in row 4 so that I get this very specific cell that's going to be used for every single formula I use. Whereas the B2, that cell is going to change every time I copy the cell. It's going to change to the next one below it or to the next one to the right, depending on which way I drag, which is a really nice feature of Excel. So if I highlight that cell, and you see that little box down in the bottom right corner, I'm going to click on it, and I drag. And you see I get the solid black lines. And if I drag it all the way until I am in my final row, you can see it finds all the test scores minus the average. Now the next thing I need is to square that. So I click on my value, I do caret key 2 for squaring. And what that does is it makes every value positive and squares them. Now I can click and drag and get all my values, but here's a really nice feature as well. If I have a long column of data, what I can do is I can double click on that little black box there, and it fills in all of my data points. Everything, all done at once. Now I need my sum of these squared values. So I do equals SU, and oh, there's sum. And I'm going to highlight all those values again and hit enter. That's my sum of my squares. Now variance is that sum divided by my sample size minus 1. Well, I have 29 students. 29 minus 1 is 28. So equals sum of the squares divided by 28. Now, that's a very long process to find variance. Much better than having to do it by hand, but even with Excel it is somewhat tedious. But watch what Excel does have. If I did looking for variance, and I'm talking about a sample because it's only my class, it's going to tell me that it will estimate the variance of my sample. If I go back and I highlight all of my data, it comes out with the exact same variance. So much simpler. 3-4 letters and highlighting data. Now if I need standard deviation, I'd have to do all of this work and then do the square root. SQ, oh, there's square root of that value. So I know it should be 10 and about 2300ths. But I also have a formula. If I start spelling standard deviation, standard dev.s. If I highlight my test scores, oh, I forgot one again. See, it's slightly off. So I always want to make sure I got all my data sets. So B2. So it's always great to check that formula bar. And they come out exactly the same. So whether I do it manually or standard, or using the formulas, it'll come out the same as long as I pay attention and make sure that I highlight all of my data. So think about the time it takes to do this manually. Think about if you were doing it by hand versus knowing just a couple formulas. And you can see how much quicker and efficient you can be with Excel.